Congratulations, you've just been accepted into the Jedi Order. You're about to become one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. But spoiler alert, you're probably not going to make it. In this video, we're exploring the forgotten truths behind the Jedi, by imagining you, just a regular person, trying to survive a day like they do. So, sit back, grab a snack, and let the galaxy fade around you. And if you enjoy slow journeys through strange history, feel free to subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It's always fascinating to see where Star Wars fans are watching from across the galaxy. Now, let's begin. Being a Jedi sounds cool when you're a kid. You get a lightsaber, you can do flips, and the Force basically makes you a space wizard. But for Obi-Wan Kenobi, it started way before all that, as in, taken from his family before he could even walk. No hugs, no bedtime stories, no learning how to ride a bike, just instant spiritual boot camp. He was born on the planet Stugin, a planet nobody talks about, probably because it sounds like something you name a soup, and he didn't stay there long. Jedi recruiters sensed the Force in him when he was just a baby, so off he went to Coruscant to join the Jedi Order. No goodbye kisses, no mum slipping credits into his lunch pouch. From the start, Obi-Wan was good, like frustratingly good. He trained hard, followed rules, respected his teachers, and didn't set anything on fire, unlike some of the other younglings. He was always a little too serious for his age. While the other kids might sneak a look at a holodrama or draw moustaches on Jedi statues, Obi-Wan was meditating or correcting their grammar. But being a good Jedi didn't mean being happy. Jedi life was weird. You didn't get to have friends the way normal kids did. Everything had to be detached. You weren't supposed to feel fear or anger or, and this one hurt, romantic interest. Yeah, Jedi weren't allowed to date or flirt or even daydream about holding someone's hand too affectionately. Love was seen as a slippery slope. One kiss and boom, you're a Sith Lord with lava eyes. So, while other teenagers were figuring out their feelings, Obi-Wan was figuring out how not to have any. If you had a crush, bury it. If you felt jealous, meditate. If someone winked at you in the temple cafeteria, you bowed politely and then avoided eye contact for a week. At age 13, Obi-Wan was chosen as Padawan by Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn. Sounds great, right? But Qui-Gon, well, he wasn't exactly a cuddly mentor. He was wise, yes, but also stubborn, unpredictable, and constantly arguing with the Jedi Council. Obi-Wan spent half his Padawan years chasing Qui-Gon across dangerous planets, the other half apologizing to people Qui-Gon had offended. He loved Qui-Gon, in the way you might love a brilliant but chaotic uncle who keeps forgetting your birthday. But it was hard. Obi-Wan wanted structure, rules, clear paths. Qui-Gon wanted freedom, instinct, rebellion. They clashed a lot. And every time Obi-Wan tried to do something by the book, Qui-Gon would give him that mystical, you're missing the point look, and wander off into a swamp or something. Then came Naboo. Obi-Wan was just 25 when everything changed. He and Qui-Gon were sent to deal with a political dispute, classic Jedi assignment, and wound up in the middle of a full-blown planetary invasion, with Sith Lords showing up for the first time in 1,000 years. And just like that, the history books stopped being history. The Sith were back, and Qui-Gon was gone, killed by Darth Maul in one of the most brutal lightsaber duels the galaxy had seen in ages. And Obi-Wan? He had to watch it happen. He held his dying master in his arms. No time to grieve, no time to scream, just immediate responsibility. Because as Qui-Gon's last request, Obi-Wan had to train Anakin Skywalker, a kid the Council didn't even want, a boy with too much anger, too much fear, and a dangerous amount of midichlorians. But Obi-Wan made a promise, and Jedi don't break promises, especially not to the man who raised you like a son, even if he also gave you emotional whiplash and terrible advice about haircuts. So there Obi-Wan was, barely out of Padawan training, grieving, emotionally exhausted, with a troubled 9-year-old in his care. Not exactly the peaceful Jedi path he imagined. And worst of all, still no girlfriends. So, you've just lost your master. You're barely in your 20s. You're grieving, confused, and quietly terrified. Perfect time to be handed one of the most emotionally unstable kids in the galaxy and told, hey, raise this one. He might be Space Jesus or Space Hitler, we're not sure yet. That's exactly what happened to Obi-Wan. Anakin Skywalker wasn't just powerful, he was intense. He was angry, charming, reckless, and brilliant, and never quite fit into the Jedi mold. He asked questions you weren't supposed to ask. He felt things you weren't supposed to feel. He wanted love, loyalty, freedom, things that didn't fit inside the Jedi box. And Obi-Wan? He tried, he really did. He tried to be the older brother, then the father figure, then the stern teacher, then the patient friend. Some days Anakin would call him master with real warmth. Other days, it felt like Obi-Wan was one sarcastic eye roll away from being force-pushed into a wall. It was exhausting, like mentoring someone who keeps insisting they're the chosen one, while ignoring your advice, your authority, and occasionally the laws of gravity. But Obi-Wan didn't complain. He couldn't. Jedi aren't supposed to feel burdened. You meditate, you accept, you let go. Even if your apprentice is sneaking off to have secret weddings with senators, you just gently suggest maybe that's not very Jedi-like, and then go sit on a rock somewhere and blame yourself for everything. Then came the Clone Wars. Obi-Wan wasn't just a Jedi anymore. He was a general. No military training, no say in the matter. One day he's teaching meditation, the next he's commanding battalions of clone soldiers across war-torn planets. And again, he just did it, because that's what Jedi do. They serve, they sacrifice, even if it feels wrong. And it did feel wrong. The Jedi were supposed to be peacekeepers, defenders of justice, but now they were on the front lines, wearing armor, barking orders, making life and death decisions there every single day. Obi-Wan watched friends die. He watched innocent people suffer. He gave orders that got others killed. And every night, he was supposed to just breathe deeply and let it all go. The council didn't help. They were distant, cold, philosophical. When Obi-Wan voiced concerns, they gave him riddles. When he looked for guidance, they told him to look inward. Great. Super helpful. Try telling that to the clone troopers sleeping in mud while droid tanks roll over the horizon. And then there was Satine. Yeah, the Duchess of Mandalore. Obi-Wan's one almost maybe could have been love story. She was brilliant, fierce, elegant, everything a Jedi wasn't allowed to want. They met during a mission years ago, got stuck in dangerous situations, shared quiet moments, long stares, you know the vibe. And for a moment, he almost broke the rules. He loved her, he really did. In another life they might have been happy, but the Jedi Code doesn't make exceptions for love. So Obi-Wan made the noble choice, the Jedi choice. He stayed in the Order, said goodbye to her, and buried his feelings under more layers of duty, calmness, and well-practiced emotional denial. But the thing is, he never stopped loving her, and he never really forgave himself for letting her go. That's the secret tragedy of Obi-Wan. He followed every rule, did everything right, and still ended up carrying mountains of grief. Meanwhile, Anakin, who wasn't following the rules, kept spiraling. He was hiding his marriage, losing sleep, snapping at people, becoming increasingly obsessed with power and control. And Obi-Wan, still trying to be the calm center in the storm, still trying to hold it all together. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. He just didn't know how to stop it. The Jedi taught him to suppress feelings, not process them. So instead of confronting Anakin, he tiptoed. He reassured, he rationalized. Because if Anakin was slipping, what did that say about him as a teacher? And all the while, the war raged on. Planets burned, friends died. The line between light and dark kept getting blurrier. And Obi-Wan kept showing up, day after day, doing what needed to be done, even when it felt like the galaxy was quietly falling apart behind his back. He was loyal, he was brave, he was kind, but he was also alone. You fought in 1,000 battles. You gave your life to the Jedi Code. You said no to love, no to attachment, no to ever having a real moment of peace. And what do you get? A front row seat to the end of everything. Order 66 wasn't just a betrayal. It was the kind of soul-crushing heartbreak that words barely touch. One day, you're sitting among friends, surrounded by light. And the next, clones are gunning down your brothers and sisters in cold silence. Jedi across the galaxy fell without warning, without mercy. It wasn't just a slaughter, it was erasure, a purge designed to leave no trace behind. And Obi-Wan? He didn't even have time to process it. One moment he's riding a lizard across a cliff. Yeah, we still don't talk about that enough. And the next, he's being shot at by soldiers he thought were allies. He survives. Barely. But survival doesn't mean safety. It means crawling out of the wreckage with nothing left. No army, no temple, no council, just questions, silence, and the slow realization that the one person he trusted most, his own Padawan, was the one holding the match. Anakin Skywalker didn't just fall to the dark side, he dove, and Obi-Wan had to watch it happen. He hears the news secondhand: temple destroyed, younglings dead. Anakin spotted marching through fire like some kind of Sith god. The Jedi who once swore to protect life had become death incarnate, and the council? Gone. So what do you do when your student, your brother, your friend, your failure, becomes the nightmare you were trained to fight? You go after him. That's what Obi-Wan did. He didn't hesitate, not because he wanted to, not because he thought he could fix it, but because he knew there was no one else left. If Anakin was lost, it had to end with him. No redemption arc, no dramatic reunion, just heartbreak in the lava-soaked shadows of Mustafar. That duel, it wasn't just swords, it was 20 years of love and frustration and guilt exploding into fire. Obi-Wan didn't want to win, but he had to. And when it was over, when Anakin lay broken, burning, screaming in hatred, Obi-Wan couldn't finish the job. Because no matter what Anakin became, Obi-Wan still loved him. So he walked away. And from that moment on, Obi-Wan Kenobi wasn't a Jedi. Not really. The war was over, the Order was dust, and his identity, the one thing he'd clung to his entire life, was gone. What did he have left? A desert, a cave, a mission to watch over a child who might be hope, might be nothing, but was all that remained of the galaxy he'd tried to save. And that was it. He lived in silence, hiding, haunted, watching the suns rise over Tatooine like they were supposed to mean something, when really, they just lit up another day of regret. He didn't rebuild, he didn't fight back, he just waited for the boy to grow, waited for a time that might never come. And in that waiting, he faded. The confident general became a ghost, the wise Jedi became a myth. The man who once stood in front of entire armies now stood behind sand dunes, quietly watching a farm boy chase after womp rats. And all the while, he carried the weight of everything. The broken code, the fallen order, the death of his master, the betrayal of his student, all wrapped up in a quiet, soft-spoken man in a dirty robe, who still tried to do the right thing even when it hurt every day to wake up. In the end, he gave everything, his life, his heart, his future, and the galaxy never even said thank you. He just vanished into the sand. Picture being way older than anyone in the galaxy, like almost 1,000 years older, but never knowing where you came from. That was Yoda. He was born in 896 BBY on an unknown planet into a mysterious species. No name, no family, no homeworld fans actually know. And that mystery stuck with him his whole life. As a youngling, Yoda grew up different. He showed strong Force sensitivity almost immediately. That led Master Nakata del Gormo, who likely found Yoda after a ship crash, to take him under wing. Legend says Yoda and a friend of his were drifting in space when they crashed on a swamp planet, where Master Gormo discovered their gifts. Imagine being plucked from everything you knew, never to see your home or friend again. That's lifespan trauma, but it happened before he was 100. He barely remembered that friend or what home ever meant. Instead, he went to Coruscant and became a Jedi initiate. By age 96, he was already a Jedi Master, and not long after, one of the youngest to join the High Council. So here's Yoda, an orphan from a species nobody understands, shipped off to train at a place he didn't choose, molded into the perfect Jedi. No childhood, no memories except what he was told to remember, and that created a sense of isolation no one asked about. For centuries he taught others. He was the grand storyteller of Jedi history, cultural custodian, but he had no culture of his own to belong to. He taught the code, emotions suppress clarity, fear leads to darkness, attachment's a trap. He preached connection through the Force, but he personally only felt separation. Yoda oversaw thousands of Jedi. He cultivated lightsaber rituals, passed Kyber traditions, advised on strategy, shaped doctrine. But invisibly, silently, he carried loss. The friend from the crash he never spoke of. The unknown home, the constant pressure of being special. Each initiative he trained was another reminder of what he never had. Family, belonging, a name his people called him before the temple renamed him. As the High Republic gave way to darker politics, Yoda held on to dogma. He believed the Order's structure, its mission, its rituals, was the only thing between galactic order and chaos. He trusted the Council. He trusted the Senate. He trusted himself. He pushed everyone else to follow, while he alone felt the emptiness underneath. When Count Dooku left, when the Jedi became generals, when the Republic twisted itself, Yoda didn't change the plan. He oversaw the change. He never showed weakness. He never admitted fear. He did not question. He taught the younger Jedi to value detachment over trust, to follow a path that almost never accommodated grief or love. The clone troopers turned on their commanders, on their teachers. Yoda realized that structure that looked like strength was brittle. His model had failed. He survived, but not triumphantly. He lost everything. The order he built became an extinct museum. The Council's wisdom he upheld became the lie he would live with. The friends he'd trained became casualties. He realized too late that the foundations he believed in, certainty, control, separation, was what broke the galaxy. He didn't flee because he was safe. He fled because he was guilty. And in the swamp on Dagobah, which he may have visited as a young Jedi searching for answers, Yoda settled not out of peace, but because it was the only place he could disappear. Yoda's early life, lonely, rootless, molded by doctrine, turned into centuries of service built on sand. He taught others to suppress, to detach, to endure alone. But his own loneliness didn't lift. If anything, it grew heavier with age. 900 years of regret, all from not having a place to call home, and by teaching others the same. That's why it sucked to be Yoda. He was built to be perfect, but perfect is lonely. He was molded to be wise, but wisdom burned him inward. He was meant to lead generation after generation, and they followed him off a cliff. By the time the Clone Wars ended, Yoda had trained Jedi for over 8 centuries. That's more than 30 generations of students who passed through his lessons, repeated his teachings, trusted him with their path. And then, in a matter of hours, they were gone. Not because of some invincible enemy, not because they failed, but because the very structure Yoda helped build, its blind loyalty, its stubborn routines, left them defenseless. He had watched the Jedi transform from peacekeepers into soldiers. Diplomats turned warriors, philosophers turned weapons. He knew they were drifting, but by the time he felt how far, it was too late. The code he had taught like scripture, the council he had guided like family, the order he had shaped into a monument, it collapsed in front of him, and not with a roar, but a whisper. A switch flipped. The clones turned. Lightsabers dimmed. Silence followed. Yoda survived the purge, but it wasn't survival in the way people imagine. It was silence, hiding. It was waiting, not for revenge or rescue, but for time to pass. That's what Dagobah was. Not a fortress, not a last stand, just exile. He had chosen to disappear on a planet soaked in darkness, one that concealed him from the Empire, but also isolated him from everything that had defined him. There were no younglings, no council chambers, no ritual, no hum of training sabers, just a swamp, thick with rot and stillness. And in that stillness, regret began to grow louder. He thought often of Dooku, of how he dismissed his former apprentice's doubts, how he failed to see the warning signs, how he refused to believe corruption could touch the heart of the Senate. Dooku left not just because he lost faith in the Republic, but because the Jedi had stopped listening. Yoda didn't listen either, and that mistake cost them all. He thought of Anakin, his fear, his confusion, his desperate search for meaning beyond the code. Yoda had warned him about fear, but offered no comfort. He'd cautioned about loss, but never showed him how to grieve. He taught Anakin to avoid the darkness, but never how to live with pain. And when Anakin fell, Yoda didn't chase him. He blamed the boy's weakness, not the system that ignored it. That guilt never left him. Time moved differently on Dagobah. The days weren't marked by Jedi trials or council meetings. They passed quietly, one blending into the next. He ate alone, meditated alone, spoke to no one but the trees. The Force was still with him, but it was quieter now, less like a current, more like a memory. The galaxy spun on without him, and all he could do was watch. When Luke finally arrived, it wasn't a joyful moment. It wasn't relief, it was hesitation, because Yoda knew what was coming. Another young, impulsive Jedi with too many questions and too much hope. The same mistakes, ready to repeat. He tried to warn him, tried to slow him down, tried, maybe for the first time, to teach with empathy instead of doctrine. But even then, it felt like too little too late. Yoda trained Luke not to preserve the old order, but to let it go. He didn't say it outright, but every lesson pointed in that direction. Don't follow the old rules. Don't cling to the past. Don't let fear decide your path. These weren't Jedi Council mottos, these were confessions. Quiet admissions from someone who had followed all the rules, lived by every teaching, and still watched everything fall apart. And when his final moments came, there was no grand farewell, no funeral pyre, no solemn gathering of Jedi to send him off. Just a quiet breath, a fading smile, and the weight of 900 years slowly lifted from his shoulders. But the galaxy never knew that behind the calm expression and wise words was someone who had spent centuries questioning everything he believed. Who carried the ghosts of thousands of students, who had trained the Jedi that built the Republic and the Jedi that destroyed it, who watched the stars he'd helped light go dark one by one. Yoda was the greatest Jedi of his time, but being great didn't protect him from sorrow. It didn't shield him from failure. If anything, it made those failures echo louder. That's why it sucked to be Yoda. Not because he wasn't strong or smart or brave, but because he carried more loss than any Jedi in history, and lived long enough to understand every painful reason why. The chosen one. The one who was supposed to bring balance to the Force, end the darkness, restore peace to the galaxy. And you started off as a literal slave. Born in the sands of Tatooine, your childhood wasn't filled with lightsabers and wisdom. It was filled with heat, grease and fear. You were 9 years old, fixing pod racers for junk dealers and dodging beatings when things went wrong. You didn't get bedtime stories. You got explosive chips planted in your neck just to make sure you didn't run. No father, no real protection. Just you, your mother, and the distant hum of a galaxy that didn't care if you lived or died. And then one day, a group of robed strangers showed up and said you were special. They promised you a new life, full of purpose. They tested your blood, talked about your midichlorian count, like you were some kind of science experiment, and told you that you might be the most powerful, Force-sensitive being in 1,000 years. Sounds good, right? Well, the Jedi also made it very clear. To join them, you had to leave your mother behind, forever. So you said goodbye to the only person who ever truly loved you, hopped in a spaceship, and flew off with a bunch of emotionally repressed monks who didn't know what to do with a traumatized child. From the beginning, you didn't fit in. Too old, too angry, too emotional, too human. The Jedi wanted peace and detachment. You wanted connection, closeness, something real. But every time you tried to form one, they told you it was dangerous. Attachment leads to fear. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to suffering. You were 9 years old and already halfway to becoming a Sith, according to the rules. And they didn't even try to help. They trained you like everyone else, expected you to meditate and suppress, but never addressed the fire inside you. They didn't help you heal. They just told you to bury it. Ignore the nightmares. Let go of the fear. Be calm. Be patient. Be what the Jedi needed you to be, but you couldn't. Because underneath all of it, you were still that scared little boy who just wanted to go back to Tatooine and save his mum. And they never let you. Obi-Wan tried. He really did. He trained you, guided you, watched over you like an older brother, trying to fill a father's shoes. But even he didn't know how to help you feel. He just kept repeating the same lines the Council gave him. Discipline, peace, no attachments. Be better, be less. So you grew up strong, fast, respected by many, feared by more, but always alone. They said you were the chosen one, but never made you feel like you were enough. And then you met Padme. She was light, warmth, someone who remembered you before the Jedi, back when you were just Anakin, the boy with big dreams and grease-stained hands. She made you feel seen, like you weren't broken. She laughed when no one else did. She looked at you and didn't see a prophecy. She saw you. And of course, Jedi weren't allowed to love, because naturally, that's the best way to create a stable, emotionally grounded warrior, by forbidding basic human intimacy. So you hid it, you snuck around, you broke the rules, not because you were evil, not because you were rebellious, but because you were desperate. You'd already lost your mother. You weren't going to lose the only other person who made the galaxy feel safe, but the Jedi never noticed. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. Either way, they kept pushing you away while praising your power and fearing your passion. They wanted your strength, but not your soul. your lightsaber, but not your heart. And when the war started, the Clone Wars, everything got worse. Suddenly you weren't a student, you were a general, a symbol, a weapon. They threw you into battles you weren't ready for, gave you soldiers to lead and planets to save, all while still expecting you to follow the code like nothing had changed. You weren't even 20 yet, and they already wanted you to be a legend. No rest, no space to grieve, no help, just expectations and whispers and fear. And behind all of it, in the shadows, someone was watching. Someone who did see you, who did listen, who offered power, safety, freedom from pain. Palpatine. He didn't tell you to suppress your emotions. He told you to use them. He didn't scold you for caring. He told you that love was strength. And he didn't say, let go of everything you fear to lose. He said, I'll help you protect it. He gave you exactly what the Jedi never could. And that was the beginning of the end. You were a Jedi General now, a warrior with the weight of thousands of clone lives on your shoulders. You never asked for it. You were barely 20, but they handed you a battalion and sent you into battle like it was just another training simulation. The Jedi weren't supposed to be soldiers, but you were the face of the war. You led men into fire, into impossible odds, and they followed you. Not because they had to, not because of programming, but because you fought beside them. You remembered their names. You treated them like people, not disposable assets. And yet, while you were out there saving lives, winning battles, and being the symbol of hope for the Republic, the Council still didn't trust you. They praised your victories, but always with hesitation in their eyes. You were too passionate, too bold, too emotional. You didn't sit still like the rest. You made decisions with your gut, not just the code. They couldn't control that. You brought results, but not the kind they liked. Behind closed doors, they talked about you, about how powerful you'd become, about your temper, about your attachments. Padme was still in your life, still your secret. Your marriage was hidden away like some criminal offense. You couldn't even talk to anyone about it, not your brothers in arms, not your fellow Jedi. Not Obi-Wan, who you loved like family, but who you knew would report you. So instead, you held it in. The nightmares, the fear, the visions of your mother dying had never stopped. And now, they were about Padme. You saw her screaming, dying in childbirth, and you knew the Force wasn't just playing tricks on you. You asked for help, and the Council told you, let go. Let go of your fear. Let go of your love. Let go of the very thing that made you human. It was cruel. They told you to care about all life, but not about one person. They said love was forbidden, but sending child soldiers into war was perfectly fine. The Jedi Code had stopped being about peace a long time ago. Now it was just politics and contradictions. You were starting to crack. Palpatine, though, he was always there, always calm, always listening. He called you by your name, Anakin, not Padawan, not General. He told you how proud he was, how the Council was blind, how only you had the strength to reshape the galaxy. He told you the story of Darth Plagueis, a Sith Lord who had the power to save people from death, to cheat the grave itself. You asked, is it possible to learn this power? And Palpatine answered, not from a Jedi. That was the moment the lines started to blur, not because you wanted power for power's sake, but because you were terrified. You'd already lost your mother, and if you lost Padme too, you wouldn't survive it. The Jedi called fear a path to the dark side, but they never gave you tools to deal with it. Just silence, meditation, denial. So when they made you a member of the Jedi Council, but denied you the rank of Master, that wasn't just an insult, it was confirmation. They never respected you. They wanted to use you. They gave you a seat at the table, but not a voice. Not because you weren't ready, but because they were afraid of what you might become. And then they turned around and asked you to spy on the Chancellor, the one man who had treated you with kindness, who had trusted you, who had promised to teach you the power to save Padme. So now the Jedi wanted you to betray your mentor, while also keeping your marriage secret, while also leading a war, while also trying not to fall apart inside. You were burning alive, and no one saw it, except Palpatine. He didn't just offer you the dark side, he offered you control, security, a way out of the chaos, a path that didn't demand self-destruction. And when Mace Windu moved to arrest him, you had to choose. Your loyalty, your fear, your love, your soul. You chose to act, because you didn't want to watch another person you loved die, Because the Jedi had pushed you into a corner and called it balance. Because you were done begging them to understand. And in one motion, you destroyed the only bridge left between Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader. Not for power, not for glory, but because deep down, you were still just that boy on Tatooine, and you were tired of being powerless. They said Anakin Skywalker was gone the moment he pledged himself to the Sith and took the name Darth Vader. But that was never the full truth, was it? Because somewhere beneath all that armor and anger, beneath the mechanical breath and twisted legacy, you were still there. The boy from Tatooine, the hero of the Republic, the man who once swore he'd do anything to save the ones he loved. You didn't just betray the Jedi, you understood them. That's what made you dangerous. That's what made you the perfect weapon. You knew how they thought, how they moved, how they fought, because you were one of them. Trained by Obi-Wan, praised by the Council, feared by the Separatists, and now used by the Emperor. But this wasn't power. This wasn't freedom. Being a Jedi meant giving up everything that made you human. And being a Sith just took what was left. They told you to let go of attachments, to silence your emotions, to live without love. And now look at you, alone, trapped in a prison of steel and silence, haunted by memories you can't erase and regrets you can't fix. You killed your brothers. You destroyed the temple. You stood in fire and watched the only home you ever had burn. And every time you close your eyes, you see the faces of those you couldn't save, or worse, the ones you destroyed with your own hands. You thought this path would protect Padme, that if you were strong enough, if you had enough control, maybe you could stop the nightmares from coming true. But they came anyway. She died. And you never got to hold your child, never got to hear her voice again, never got to be anything but a ghost stuck between two names, Anakin and Vader, neither one bringing you peace. The Sith didn't care about your pain. Palpatine fed on it. He used you, twisted every wound into a leash, until the only thing you had left was rage. You weren't feared because of your strength. You were feared because of what you lost, because you were still grieving, still broken, still human underneath it all, no matter how deep you tried to bury that truth. Even Obi-Wan saw it. When you told him Anakin was dead, he didn't believe you. And the thing is, neither did you. Because somewhere in the quiet corners of your mind, that voice still whispered. The one that cared too much. The one that loved too hard. The one that never stopped wanting to go back and undo it all. And when you saw your son Luke, standing there refusing to fight, you saw that light again. Not in the Jedi way, not in the doctrine or the robes or the endless rules, but in the simplest, most painful thing the Jedi always told you to reject, love. That's what cracked the armor. That's what made the mask feel heavier. Because for the first time in decades, someone looked at you and didn't see Vader. They saw Anakin. And you remembered what it was like to be whole. To be a brother, a husband, a friend. A Jedi, yes, but also a man. And when Palpatine tried to kill your son, you didn't act out of politics or prophecy. You acted out of something deeper. You didn't do it because the Jedi Code told you to. You did it because you were a father. And that's why it sucked to be a Jedi. Because they taught you to bury love, to fear it, to fight it. But in the end, that's what saved you. Not the Jedi, not the Sith, not the Force. It was the one thing they told you to leave behind, that brought you back. Anakin Skywalker didn't die, he just got lost. And in your final breath, you finally found your way home. The Council's coldest mind, the galaxy's sharpest lightsaber, and the man who never broke the rules, until it all came crashing down. Mace Windu. From the outside, you looked like the blueprint for what a Jedi should be. You followed the code without question. You mastered Varpad, a fighting style so dangerous it flirted with the dark side. You could read shatter points in the Force, those tiny cracks in people's destiny that let you see how everything might break, long before it ever did. And yet, for all your control, your discipline, your wisdom, life as a Jedi still sucked. Because while others had room to stumble, to doubt, to feel, you didn't. You couldn't. You had to be perfect. Not just because you held a seat on the council, not just because people looked up to you, but because you knew, deep down, that the entire Jedi Order was hanging by a thread, and if you made one wrong move, the whole thing might fall apart. Spoiler alert, it did. You weren't born into privilege or prophecy. You came up in a galaxy that didn't care about your name, didn't hand you a legacy. You earned every step, every scar, every ounce of power you carried. But power, for a Jedi, is a cursed blessing, because the more you had to hide. Emotions? Off limits. Doubts? Bury them. Desire? You already know, especially that kind of desire. Jedi don't do love, they don't do attachments. They don't even do flirting. Imagine living your whole life with a purple lightsaber and not a single number in your holo database. Tragic. While other Jedi tried to balance peacekeeping with humanity, you went all in on the code. You were the code. You didn't laugh. You didn't compromise. And because of that, they called you cold. But it wasn't coldness, it was fear. Not of your enemies, but of what might happen if you felt anything at all. And yet, despite the discipline, despite the control, the chaos still found you. The Clone Wars erupted, and the Jedi, led by your very council, became generals in a war they didn't start, fighting for a republic they couldn't save. You were supposed to be peacekeepers, guardians of balance, not soldiers leading armies into battles you didn't believe in. You tried to hold the line. You did hold the line, again and again, and the cost? It wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. The war twisted everything. Jedi were dying by the thousands. The Senate was rotting from within. And every time you looked at Chancellor Palpatine, you felt the Force pull back like it was trying to warn you. But the Council didn't listen, so you watched, you waited, you clenched your jaw and stayed silent, until the moment came. Anakin Skywalker, the so-called Chosen One, walks in and tells you Palpatine is the Sith Lord you've been hunting for years. And in that moment, all your training, all your wisdom, everything you'd sacrificed, it finally leads you to the one shatter point you can't avoid. You confront Palpatine. You fight him. You win. And just when you have a chance to save the galaxy, to end the war, to prove you were right all along, Anakin betrays you. In a flash of light and agony, your hand is gone. Your body is flying, and you vanish into the night sky like a ghost no one will remember. No grave, no closure, no one even came looking. You were one of the greatest Jedi who ever lived, and you died alone, branded a traitor by the very republic you swore to protect. So yeah, being a Jedi, it sucked, especially when the cost of doing everything right was losing everything anyway. Mace Windu didn't arrive fully formed. Before the purple lightsaber, before the council, before the Varped combat style that danced on the edge of darkness, there was a child born on a jungle world, orphaned before he could even walk. Harun Kal wasn't the kind of planet with idyllic villages or scenic lakes. It was wild, unpredictable, filled with civil wars over the planet's rare mineral reserves. Mace's parents, members of the Koronai tribe, a people whose blood was laced with Force sensitivity, died in tribal feuds when he was an infant. He was given to the Jedi Order at just 6 months old, before his naming ceremony. So he arrived on Coruscant without even remembering a name he'd been born with. The Jedi renamed him Mace Windu, and began moulding him into something else entirely. A warrior, a keeper of order, someone who would never again feel the sting of loss. Except they didn't erase that sting. They buried it deep. As he grew, his Force gifts showed early brilliance. He could perceive shatter points in the Force, weak spots in a person, a thing, even an entire moment in time, that no other Jedi could sense. That gift scared even his mentors. It gave him insight, but it also meant he saw constant fractures, fault lines where tragedy could erupt at any moment. At the age of 14, when most Jedi younglings struggled to assemble even a basic lightsaber, Mace set out on a mission others feared. He travelled alone to Hurricane to craft his own blade. He fought hostile natives, cracked crystals from the planet, then healed the damage he'd caused, showing a depth of discipline few Jedi had earned. In return for his humility, the planet's natives gifted him a rare violet crystal. When he constructed his lightsaber with it, the blade didn't just glow, it burned with intent and purpose. That purple blade became his signature, a badge of his uniqueness, yes, but also a warning. It signaled every time he wielded it that he carried power that skirted darkness, and that he had chosen to use that power intentionally. His apprenticeship under Master Caitlin Meyer taught him discipline, emotional control, and dedication to the code. He was close to Yoda too, absorbing the highest teachings of patience and persistence, but Harun Kal's wilderness, its turmoil and tragedy, never left him. Every capture abroad reminded him of home. Every lesson on detachment reminded him of the family he never had. Over the years, Mace returned to his planet, reconnecting with Koronai culture and their native language. He carried their suffering in his heart, even while presenting the calm facade of a Jedi Master. He trained Padawans, hunted criminals, negotiated peace. But always, the force within him hummed with tension. He had mastered physical training, lightsaber mastery, diplomacy, and the highest Jedi teachings. But he wasn't free. He never relaxed, he never laughed. In his rare off hours, if he allowed them, he might sit quietly, remembering the cradle he never slept in, the lullabies he never heard. By 28, he was on the council, second only to Yoda in influence. And the galaxy said, yes, you've made it. But he knew his journey didn't end at the council. It carried a deeper cost, because when the war came and Jedi became generals, everyone would turn to Mace Windu. Not because he wanted to lead armies, but because he could lead armies. And maybe, just maybe, he could hold it all together where others failed. He stood up for the weak, questioned Senate decisions, demanded the Jedi not become politicians. He insisted that Qui-Gon's belief in Anakin was dangerous. They called him rigid, uncompromising, even cold, but he believed his unbreakable will was the only thing standing between the galaxy and disaster. What they didn't see was the haunted look in his eyes, the look of a child who lost home and parents, channeled that loss into power, and never learned how to just live. All that discipline and strength came at a price: his freedom, his vulnerability, his humanity. That background, orphaned warrior, purple saber, mind that probed destinies, shaped who Mace was. But it also isolated him. He could channel darkness without falling in battle, but in life's quiet moments, he fought a different enemy: loneliness. And that silent battle is why being a Jedi never got easier for him, even at the top. So imagine this: you're 2, maybe 3 years old, you barely understand language, your thoughts are still forming in toddler mush, and life is just bright colours, warm hugs, and maybe chasing a fluffy animal through the tall grass. That was Ahsoka Tano, born on the remote and beautiful planet of Shili. She wasn't born into a war, or chaos, or politics. Just a tribe, a family. Her people, the Togruta, lived simply, communal, respectful of nature, strong in tradition. It wasn't Coruscant, it was home. But Ahsoka was different. The Force flowed through her like a stream through untouched wilderness. And one day, out in the forest, a large predator locked its eyes on her, a beast that should have torn her apart. Instead it sat, stilled by something ancient. She wasn't scared. She wasn't even aware she was doing anything. That's just how connected she was. That moment changed everything, not just for her, but for her people. Because suddenly, she was marked, special. And special, in the Star Wars galaxy, doesn't mean praise. It means someone shows up and takes you away. Enter Jedi Master Plo Koon. He sensed her presence from across the stars. He came down to Shili, met her family, and told them what every Jedi recruiter says. She's powerful, she has a destiny, she must be trained. It's said with calm certainty, with gentle words, but there's no choice. Not really, because who says no to the Jedi Order? Who refuses the guardians of peace and justice? And so, Ahsoka left, barely old enough to walk steadily, and already boarding a ship to a city she'd never seen. Her parents stood there, waving, probably trying not to cry, and she had no idea what was happening. She never would again, not fully. That's what it meant to be recruited. You didn't get to grow up with your mum's cooking or your dad's stories. You didn't get siblings. You didn't get to be normal. You got training. You got discipline. You got the temple. Now imagine being that child, dropped into the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, an echoing fortress of order and silence. No playful laughter, no mess, no comfort. Just halls, robes, rules, and 100 other younglings who also didn't get a choice. They were taught to suppress emotion, to never love, to never fear. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to the dark side. That mantra was repeated before you even knew how to spell your own name. Ahsoka adapted quickly. She always did. She was sharp, fiery, determined to prove herself. She learned fast. She sparred better than most kids twice her age. But that didn't mean it wasn't lonely. It didn't mean she didn't miss a mother she barely remembered. The Jedi didn't encourage holding on to those feelings. Attachment is forbidden, they'd say, but they didn't tell her what to do with the hole it left behind. By the time she was a preteen, she was different. Strong, yes, but already trained to silence her instincts, already shaped into something obedient, not someone developing naturally, but someone built to serve. At age 14, they assigned her to Anakin Skywalker. That wasn't normal. Most Padawans were much older when they became apprentices, but Ahsoka was exceptional, or maybe desperate, because the war was raging and Jedi were dying, and the Council needed soldiers. So they sent a literal kid to the front lines, not just as a trainee, but as a commander. A commander of clone troopers. Imagine that. One day you're still figuring out how to use a lightsaber without slicing your own foot off. The next you're barking orders at grown men in full armor. This wasn't Hogwarts. It wasn't a magical academy. It was a boot camp disguised as a religion. And Ahsoka was tossed in at full speed. She had her own fire though, quick-witted, sarcastic, never afraid to speak up. She called Anakin Sky Guy and gave attitude to generals twice her rank. But under all that charm was pressure, weight, the kind of burden no 14-year-old should have to carry, and yet they expected her to carry it like a seasoned knight. No room for tears, no time for second-guessing, just mission after mission. The Jedi Council told her that was the way, that this was the path. But she noticed things. How the Jedi spoke of peace but led armies. How they claimed to value life while commanding clone troopers bred for war. How attachment was forbidden, but grief was ignored. She didn't voice all those doubts at first. She trusted Anakin. She trusted her brothers in the 501st. She believed in the Order, but the cracks had already started. Tiny ones, quiet ones. They whispered every time she looked into the eyes of a fallen soldier. Every time the Council made another cold decision. She was supposed to feel serenity. Instead, she was learning fear. And worst of all, she was told that fear was her fault. That's why it sucked to be a Jedi. Especially if you were Ahsoka. You didn't get childhood. You didn't get choice. You got rules. There's a moment in every Jedi's life when the cracks finally stop being quiet. For Ahsoka Tano, that moment came not with a lightsaber, not in a battle, but in handcuffs. Real ones, locked on her wrists. And the worst part, they weren't put there by a Sith or a bounty hunter. They were slapped on her by her own people. Let's rewind just a bit. She was older now, stronger, wiser. A few years into the war, Ahsoka had earned the respect of entire battalions. She was no longer just the kid tagging along with Skywalker. She had victories under her belt, a reputation. The clones admired her, civilians called her a hero, but under all that glory, the Jedi Order was starting to fray. They were tired, spread thin, distracted by politics, manipulated by a chancellor who smiled too much. The Jedi were no longer monks. They were war generals, politicians, tools. And for Ahsoka, that meant walking a line between obedience and truth, between who she was and who they wanted her to be. Then it happened. An explosion at the Jedi Temple, people killed, panic everywhere. And the evidence? It pointed at her. Just like that, her world flipped upside down. She said she was innocent. Of course she did. But the Council didn't listen. Not really. Not when it counted. They didn't defend her. They didn't stand beside her. They sent her away. Not even as a Jedi. They stripped her of that title immediately. No second thoughts. After everything she had done, all the years she had served, all the soldiers she'd led, the Order looked at her and saw a liability. Anakin believed her. He fought for her. But he was just one voice in a room full of robes who had already made up their minds. So she ran, out into the underworld of Coruscant, hunted by the people she once called family. Her lightsabers were gone. Her name was mud. The clones who once saluted her now marched after her like she was a criminal. That's when it really hit her. She wasn't a Jedi, not to them. She was a scapegoat. And that realization? That cuts deeper than any lightsaber. She hid in the shadows, avoided contact. She met people, real people, struggling in the streets, scrounging to eat, working jobs the Jedi never bothered to see, and she started to realize something uncomfortable. The Jedi didn't just abandon her. They had abandoned them. The Order was too busy playing chess with the Senate to notice the galaxy falling apart beneath their feet. And for the first time, Ahsoka saw it clearly. Being a Jedi wasn't the noble path she once believed in. It was theater. It was control. And it was blind. Eventually, the truth came out. Another Jedi, Barriss Offee, had set her up. Barriss, someone Ahsoka had once trusted, someone who had reached the same breaking point and snapped. Barriss believed the Jedi had lost their way, and ironically, to prove it, she committed a crime and let her friend take the fall. With the real culprit caught, the council called Ahsoka back. They apologized, kind of. They offered her place back in the Order like nothing happened. Like the betrayal, the silence, the cuffs, the trial, like all of it had just been a little test. Ahsoka looked at them, at the council that abandoned her, at the temple that no longer felt like home, and she said no. She walked away, that moment. That's what made her different. She didn't fall to the dark side. She didn't grab her saber and lash out. She didn't scream, she just left, quietly, gracefully, and completely, because she finally understood what the Jedi had become, a machine, a rigid system that punished emotion, distrusted instinct, and feared change. They claimed to be defenders of peace, but they feared the very thing that made her human, her passion, her loyalty, her love. She chose herself, and that made her free. But it also made her alone, because leaving the Jedi wasn't like quitting a job. It was erasing everything, her identity, her rank, her friends, even her place in the Force. There was no roadmap for ex-Jedi, no hotline to call. She was out there on her own. A teenager with combat skills, no income, and a galaxy full of enemies. And that's the real cost. That's why it sucked to be a Jedi. Not just because of the rules or the war or the constant sacrifice, but because the one time she needed them the most, the one time she was scared and vulnerable, they didn't protect her. They discarded her. So, yeah, Ahsoka survived. She rebuilt. She became something new, something better. But the Jedi Order? That part of her story would always be a scar. Not because she failed them, but because they failed her. You walk away from the temple, not with rage, not with fear, just weight, like something heavy finally snapped off your shoulders, and now you're carrying it in your hands instead. The air outside feels different, sharper. You used to stand tall in front of crowds, flanked by clone troopers and Jedi masters, your every step backed by duty. Now you're just another face in the streets of Coruscant. No saber, no robes, no name that means anything anymore. Ahsoka Tano? She doesn't exist here. She was a Jedi, was. You try not to look back, but part of you always does. And now that you're out here, you realize how small the temple really was, how much it kept hidden from you. The chaos of the galaxy, the suffering, the poverty. It was never out there. It was right under your nose. But the Jedi didn't look down. They only looked forward. And now you're walking straight into the mess they ignored. You try odd jobs, fixing engines, hauling junk, even helping farmers, anything that doesn't require you to flash a lightsaber. You're trying to blend in, trying to be normal, but you're not normal. You hear things others don't, feel things they can't. And no matter how far you walk, the Force doesn't leave you. It hums under your skin like a whisper you can't silence. You save a village. Then another, then another. You try not to get involved, but the people are hurting, and you can't just stand by. It's not in your bones. You were trained to protect. That doesn't just switch off. But every time you do something good, every time you stand up, someone asks the same question. Are you a Jedi? You freeze every time. Because, no, but also not quite. You don't know what you are anymore. You're not Sith. You're not a knight. You're not even a Padawan. You're just you. But that's never been enough, has it? Then one day you feel it. A pulse. A scream through the Force. Like something tearing apart inside your chest. And then silence. You don't know what it is at first, just a cold, creeping dread. You feel like the galaxy just lost its heartbeat. You find out later, it was the clones. Order 66. The Jedi, gone. Just like that. Executed in a day. Your friends, your mentors, your family. And somehow, you survived. Not because you were lucky, but because you'd already walked away. They couldn't kill what they didn't see coming. But that doesn't feel like survival. It feels like guilt. You were right about the Order. They were blind, flawed. But they didn't deserve to be hunted like animals. And you? You're stuck in this weird purgatory. Not dead like them. Not dark like the ones who destroyed them. Just floating in the space between, trying to make sense of it all. And that's the thing no one talks about. Leaving the Jedi doesn't make the pain go away. It doesn't make the war stop echoing in your dreams. It just makes the silence louder. There are no missions anymore. No briefings, no purpose handed to you. You have to build your own, every single day. You go underground, new name, new contacts, you hear whispers. Vader, Inquisitors, the Empire. You try to stay out of it, but fate has a way of pulling you back in. You can't unsee the suffering, and you definitely can't unfeel it. Eventually, you fight again. But not for the Republic, not for the Council. You fight for people, for justice, for what the Jedi were supposed to be before everything went wrong. And that's when you realize something terrifying. You're stronger now than you ever were in the Order. Freer, sharper. You trust your instincts again. You feel things deeply, and you act on them. Not because you're told to, but because it's right. But it came at a cost. You'll never be truly at peace. You'll never walk into that temple again. You'll never hear Anakin's voice call you Snips like he used to. That version of you, the bright-eyed Padawan who believed in heroes, is gone. And what's left? Someone still fighting, still carrying the light, but with no flag. No robe, no council to fall back on. That's why it sucked to be a Jedi. Not just because of the rules, not because you couldn't love or couldn't leave, but because, when it all came crashing down, you realized you were never meant to be a cog in their machine. You were never meant to just obey. You were born in a castle, not a metaphorical one, an actual, sprawling estate nestled in the ancient lands of Sereno, lined with obsidian towers and old-world honor. You were a noble, a count, heir to one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in the galaxy. You had everything, until the Jedi took you. They didn't ask, they just arrived, sensed your potential in the Force, and made their case. Your father, an arrogant, dismissive man, was happy to let you go, less of a threat to his legacy. You weren't his son anymore. You were property of the Jedi Order, and so began your life in the Temple. Imagine trading marble halls for cold stone floors, going from feasts to rations, tutors to masters, heritage to humility. From the second you stepped into the Jedi Temple, your name was no longer yours. You weren't Dooku of Sereno. You were just another initiate, a number, a project. But here's the thing. You were good at it, too good. You were elegant, disciplined, focused. Your lightsaber technique, impeccable. Your mind, sharper than most masters by the time you were a teenager. But being exceptional in the Jedi Temple didn't make life easier. It made it lonelier. The Order doesn't reward individuality. It discourages it. You had questions, philosophical ones, moral ones, political ones. And every time you asked, they gave you the same answer. A Jedi doesn't question the Council. But you did. You questioned everything. Why the Order served the Republic so blindly? Why the Senate, rotted with corruption, was still considered a partner? Why the Jedi helped politicians more than people? Why warlords were left alone if it didn't suit galactic interests? Why peacekeepers were being turned into pawns? And every time you brought it up, they'd remind you, that is not our place, Dooku. You started to see the cracks, and they started to see you as difficult. Even your own Padawan, Qui-Gon Jinn, brilliant, stubborn, empathetic. You loved him like a son, but even he wouldn't follow you all the way down that path. He clung to the Jedi ideals, even as you tried to show him they were falling apart. And then there was the pain of knowing your heritage was still out there. You were Count of Sereno by blood. The Order told you to forget it. Let it go. Your name meant nothing now. But how could you forget who you were, what your people needed, what you could have been? You kept hearing stories of your home falling deeper into oligarchy and despair, and yet the Jedi refused to intervene. You asked again. They ignored you again. You served in the field, but not like the rest. You were elegant, surgical, political. You tried to be a diplomat, a reformer, but with every negotiation, every mission, you saw the same thing. The Republic serving itself. The Jedi following orders like droids, and innocent systems left behind. Your disillusionment wasn't a moment. It was a slow bleed. You weren't corrupted, you were disappointed. The Jedi preached detachment. But what if what you wanted wasn't for yourself? What if it was for justice, truth, reform? They still said no. So you left, not in rage, not with fire, just with resolve. You turned your back on the Order because the Order had already turned its back on the galaxy. And just like that, you were Count Dooku again. Not a Jedi, not a knight, just a man trying to fix a galaxy, too proud to admit it was broken. And that's why it sucked to be a Jedi. Because even when your heart was in the right place, even when your instincts screamed that the system was failing, you were told to sit down and stay quiet. Because being wise wasn't rewarded, being loyal was. But you were never loyal to the Jedi, you were loyal to the truth, and that's why you walked away. You thought leaving would feel like liberation, but the moment your ship drifted away from Coruscant and the Jedi Temple disappeared in the distance like a receding mountain peak, you didn't feel free. You felt hollow. The silence was louder than the lectures had ever been, and for the first time in decades, there was no code, no council, no structure. Just you, Count Dooku of Sereno, a title that suddenly felt centuries old and heavy on your shoulders. The people of Sereno welcomed you like a returning king, but you knew better. You could see the fear in their eyes, not because you were cruel, but because you were unfamiliar. You were a Jedi once, now you were something else, something they didn't understand. And it's hard to lead people who don't quite know whether to kneel or run. Still, you tried. You stepped into your birthright. You poured your wealth into restoring the systems the Republic had abandoned. You tried to create alliances not based on war, but autonomy. Not everyone wants to be ruled by the same bloated Senate on Coruscant. Not every world believes democracy should come with 1,000 middlemen. You believed in choice, and that scared them. The Jedi? They called you a traitor. They said you'd abandoned the light, but you didn't see yourself as a villain. Not yet. You were trying to be something the Jedi never let you be, your own man, and yet the further you stepped away from the temple, the more you saw how far its influence stretched. Jedi were everywhere, embedded in every council, assigned to every conflict, watching every system that dared to whisper about independence. And you realized something terrifying. You hadn't left the Jedi, you just walked into a bigger version of them. The Republic was the Order. The Order was the Republic. You thought you were taking off the leash, but the collar was still there, just hidden deeper under your skin. That's when he found you. Not in a cave, not in some dramatic duel. He approached like a shadow behind your throne, a whisper, more than a voice, Darth Sidious. You knew who he was, or at least what he was, a Sith, a manipulator, the very thing you were taught to hate. But unlike the Jedi, he listened. He agreed with your vision. He saw the same rot you saw, and he promised you power. Not for domination, not for vengeance, but for change. You didn't say yes that day, but you didn't say no either. You told yourself it was temporary, a tool, a way to make the galaxy listen. The Sith were selfish, yes, but what if you weren't? What if you could use the dark without being consumed by it? That's the thing the Jedi never warned you about. Not every fall is a plummet. Some are quiet, elegant, logical, like descending a staircase one step at a time, until you can't see the top anymore. As a Jedi, your emotions were treated like problems. You were told to ignore them, suppress them. But now, in the dark, they became your compass. Every frustration, every dream they mocked, every student they failed. You started to feel again, and it felt good. You recruited allies, not mindless followers, thinkers, warriors, idealists like you. You started the Confederacy not to destroy the Republic, but to free it. At least that's what you believed. That's what you told yourself at night. But it still sucked. Because no matter how noble your goal, you could feel the dark side watching, breathing, coiling. It wanted more. And deep down, you started to realize something the Jedi always tried to tell you. Once you step into the dark, it never lets you walk alone again. You weren't a Jedi anymore. You weren't truly a Sith yet either. You were in between. The people you once taught to follow the light now hunted you as a terrorist. Your name was erased from temple records. Your teachings labeled heresy, and the galaxy spun on, unchanged. You'd walked away from the Jedi Order, but you hadn't escaped it, because they were still out there, spreading their rules, protecting their version of peace, holding lightsabers like leashes. And maybe the worst part, some nights you missed it. Not the control, not the doctrine. You missed the feeling of belonging, of knowing who you were, of standing in a room full of students and believing you could shape the future. Now you stood alone, surrounded by armies, yet lonelier than ever, because once you break from the Jedi, there's no going back. Not really, not even if you wanted to, and that's why it sucked to be a Jedi. Because even when you left, they never stopped being a part of you, even when you hated them, even when you tried to destroy them. You'd always believed your ending would be dramatic, not necessarily glorious, but at least meaningful. You imagined a final duel with stakes, something that would matter. You pictured yourself standing firm, eyes locked with your opponent, lightsabers clashing until the very last moment. But that fantasy never came true. Instead, your story ended on your knees, with a young man's blade at your throat and no one left in the galaxy who cared. You were raised as a Jedi, trained in patience and discipline, molded to uphold a system that claimed to be selfless. But the deeper you went, the more you noticed how hollow it all felt. The Council spoke of peace while they let entire systems suffer. They claimed detachment, but played politics like senators. Even your knighthood felt like theatre. So much tradition, so little truth. So you left, not in anger, not in defiance, but because you knew it wasn't working. You walked away from the temple and returned to your roots, reclaiming your noble heritage on Sereno. You believed you could make more of a difference there, where real power could change lives. And when the Republic grew more bloated, more corrupt, you saw a chance to create something better. You would guide the Separatists, not as a tyrant, but as a reformer. You'd use your knowledge of the Jedi and the Senate to tear it all down and rebuild it stronger. But there was a problem. You weren't the only one playing that game. Sidious came to you with promises. He didn't need to lie. You could already feel how strong he was, how far he could take things. He offered you partnership, not servitude, but purpose. He saw your frustration and mirrored it. He gave you command, armies, influence, all the tools to reshape the galaxy. You became Darth Tyrannus, but never truly felt like a Sith. You still believed in structure, in order, in rules. You still believed there would be balance at the end of the chaos. And that's where you misunderstood him. Where you saw war as a means to a cleaner peace, he saw it as a tool for control. When he gave you Grievous, you thought it was a strategic choice, a powerful general to command the droid army. But it was more than that. Grievous wasn't your ally. He was your replacement. He wasn't careful, he wasn't honourable, but he was effective. And that's all Sidious ever cared about. You realised it too late. You still carried yourself like a statesman, still believed you had a seat at the table. But the longer the war dragged on, the more obvious it became. You weren't shaping anything. You were just helping someone else build a trap. And that trap was closing. And then came the final mission. The battle above Coruscant. The chaos. The plan set in motion. You stood waiting aboard the invisible hand, ready to play your part. The Jedi came. Obi-Wan, ever steady. And Anakin, raw, unstable, but powerful in a way that made you uneasy. You fought well, knocked one unconscious, disarmed the other. Then you waited for the order. Sidious, hidden behind Palpatine's mask, looked to his chosen future and told him to kill you. There was no hesitation in his voice, no regret, no surprise. You turned toward him in disbelief, expecting it to be a test, expecting some hidden instruction to reveal itself. But none came. You looked into Anakin's eyes, searching for doubt. But what you found instead was confusion, then rage, and then nothing at all. Your hands were already bound. There was nothing left to say. You saw the strike before it came, but not quickly enough to stop it. Not this time. And that was it. No farewell, no final words. Just the realization that you had spent decades trying to outthink a man who had already planned your death before you ever called him master. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the fact that you let it happen. You ignored your instincts. You ignored the warnings. You told yourself you could control him, that your influence was enough. You had left the Jedi Order thinking you were free, but you traded one dogma for another, and in the end, you were never in control of anything. You were never the architect, just another pawn. You thought of Qui-Gon in your final seconds, of the young man who once followed you so eagerly, of what he might have become if the Council had listened, if you had stayed. You wondered if he would have mourned you, if he would have understood, or if he would have struck you down himself, same as Anakin did. The truth is, no matter how far you ran, you were always a Jedi at heart. That's why it hurts so much. That's why everything you did, all the betrayals, the lies, the manipulation, still left you empty. You were never built for the Sith. You were built to believe in something. And when that belief died, you just kept walking out of habit, because you didn't know where else to go. Your very existence came loaded with weight, the kind of weight that doesn't just sit on your shoulders, it crushes them quietly over time. Your name was Ben Solo, but even that wasn't really yours. You were the son of Han Solo and Leia Organa, the nephew of Luke Skywalker, the grandson of Darth Vader. You were supposed to be the future, and deep down, everyone knew it, especially you. Your parents loved you, no question, but they were never just parents. They were galactic icons, rebels turned symbols. And with that came distance. Your mother was rebuilding governments. Your father couldn't even stay in one place long enough to figure out how to be a dad. And Luke tried. He saw something powerful in you early on, something no one else could handle. So he took you under his wing, told you he would train you, that he'd guide you, protect you from the dark, but you were never a blank slate. The Force surged in you like a storm, with no direction. And no matter how hard you tried to stay calm, it always found cracks. You'd hear whispers, feel things that others didn't. The Jedi taught you to bury it, to breathe through it, to deny it. But what if those feelings weren't wrong? What if they were the only part of you that was honest? You weren't trying to fall, you were trying to understand. But Jedi training isn't built for that. It's built to mold, not explore. It teaches you to suppress, to detach. And for someone like you, someone whose emotions didn't come in drops but tidal waves, it wasn't enough. You were told to master your fear, your anger, your doubt, but no one ever told you what to do when those things were you. And then there was Luke. The man who promised to protect you saw a glimpse of something terrifying in your mind. And for a moment, a split second of fear, he raised his lightsaber. You'll never forget that, your own uncle, your teacher, your guardian, ready to strike you down in your sleep. You didn't wait to ask why, you just ran. You burned the temple, you left behind everything you knew, not because you wanted to destroy it, but because it had already destroyed you. Enter Snoke. He didn't give you rules, he gave you answers. Where the Jedi told you to calm the storm, he told you to ride it. Where they gave you walls, he gave you freedom. He didn't see you as broken, he saw you as powerful. And power was something you'd never truly been allowed to hold without guilt. So you let go of Ben Solo. You took on a new name. You wrapped yourself in shadow. You swore off the past. And yet, it still hurt. Killing Han was supposed to set you free, but it only made the silence louder. No matter how much you dressed yourself in darkness, that light never fully left. And it wasn't noble. It was annoying. It was weakness. The voice inside that whispered of home, of Leia, of the boy who used to fix ships in the hangar while dreaming of being someone else entirely. So here you were, in black robes and a cracked mask, surrounded by power, feared by enemies, and emptier than ever. Because the truth was, no matter how far you ran, you weren't just trying to escape the Jedi. You were trying to escape the version of yourself that they never let you become. And that's why it sucked to be a Jedi. Because even when you left, the damage followed you. They taught you not to feel, and in doing so, they made you feel everything all at once. And once that kind of weight settles into your bones, there's no taking it off. You can't run from something that raised you. You can only try to rewrite the ending. And you weren't done trying, not yet. You thought it would feel different. After everything you'd been through, you thought power would finally make sense of it all. You told yourself that walking away from the Jedi was your choice. You told yourself that burning down Luke's temple was necessary, that Snoke had the truth, that the light was a lie. You convinced yourself the old life was gone, and the new one, Kylo Ren, was real. But no matter how many times you repeated it, something still felt wrong. Because Jedi training doesn't just vanish from your bones, it stays lodged in your instincts. You still catch yourself reaching out in compassion, only to yank your hand back in shame. You still hear Leia's voice in your mind, soft and patient. You still remember the ache in your chest when Han looked at you without fear. Because no matter how tightly you grip the dark, your heart never fully lets go of the light. And the Jedi made sure of that. Being a Jedi is like being raised in a glass house. You're told to be peaceful, wise, calm and empty. But then they put you in a war zone and tell you to lead troops, make battlefield calls, face Sith Lords, and somehow never let anger touch you. It's a rigged system. You were set up to fail from the start. They gave you rules that didn't match reality, and when you broke them, they called you dangerous. So now here you are, a supreme leader, a master of the Force, a man feared across the galaxy. And still, you don't sleep. You don't rest. The whispers haven't gone away. If anything, they're louder now. Because Snoke was just another Jedi in disguise. He didn't give you freedom. He gave you chains that felt different, but locked just the same. He taught you how to focus your rage, but never helped you understand your grief. He said emotions were power, but he only ever fed off them. He didn't raise you, he used you. And then Rey happened. The girl from nowhere, standing in front of you like a mirror you couldn't smash. She wasn't trained like you were. She hadn't been raised on Jedi doctrine, but she felt it. The Force, raw and alive, the same storm you carried inside. And for the first time in years, someone saw you. Not the mask, not the role, not the monster, just you. You hated her for it, and you needed her. You reached out not to convert her, but to connect. You thought maybe if she understood you, if she joined you, the hole inside would finally close. That together, you could burn down the past, Jedi and Sith, light and dark, all of it, and start something new. But she said no. She looked at you with pity, and it broke something you hadn't realized was still holding together. Because that's the thing about being a Jedi. Even when you leave, their standards stay buried in your chest like glass. You can try to pretend you've escaped, but the guilt, the shame, the longing to do something right, it never leaves. They trained you to care about others, and then expected you not to be human. They taught you to connect with the Force, but not to question the systems built on top of it. And every time you touch the Force now, it comes with layers of memory. Luke's disappointment, Leia's silence, the crushing weight of being born into a legacy you never asked for. You swing your saber harder than ever, but you're not fighting enemies. You're trying to carve away your past, and the blade just keeps bouncing back. You weren't built to be this. The darkness doesn't fit right. The mask isn't a shield, it's a prison. The more power you grab, the less you recognize the person holding it. And the Jedi, those silent ghosts from your youth, they keep haunting your reflection, reminding you what you could have been, what you should have been. So here you are, leading Star Destroyers, crushing rebellions, commanding fear, and none of it feels like victory. You wake up every day still trying to be the version of yourself they wanted, or at least trying to destroy him. That's why it sucked to be a Jedi, because even when you leave, they never really let you go. You spend the rest of your life running from the version of yourself they taught you to become. And somewhere deep down, you're still Ben, just a boy who wanted to be loved without condition, who wanted to belong without becoming a weapon, who wanted to choose his own story, and the galaxy never let him. You didn't expect to survive this long. Not really. Every battle you threw yourself into, every mission, every duel, there was a part of you that was ready for it to end. Maybe not out of guilt, maybe not even regret, just exhaustion. Because carrying this weight, this identity, this impossible mixture of Jedi teachings and Sith rage, it's like breathing through smoke. Eventually, you get tired of pretending it's air, but the galaxy wouldn't let you go quietly. Not when Rey kept reaching out, not when Leia still believed, not when your father, the memory of him or something more, looked you in the eyes, not with anger or judgment, but something worse, understanding. And that moment broke everything. All the layers of armor, all the deflection, all the rage. You thought you had buried Ben Solo years ago. Turns out, he was just buried alive. Coming back wasn't a dramatic transformation. It wasn't a beam of light or a choir of Jedi ghosts cheering you on. It was quieter, more painful, like dragging yourself out of wreckage with nothing but guilt and desperation. No one gave you a medal. No one welcomed you home. You just turned around and tried to fix what you broke, knowing full well it might be too late. That's the real cost of being a Jedi. They train you to care, then leave you unequipped to deal with failure. And when you finally come back from the dark, you're met not with celebration, but silence. Because the Jedi don't know what to do with someone who's fallen and returned. They prefer their stories clean, their heroes spotless. But you were never going to fit into that. You weren't a Luke Skywalker. You were a broken version of everything they feared. Passionate, impulsive, too powerful for your own good. And worst of all, you felt things too deeply. The Jedi hated that. And now you're standing on the other side of it all, knowing you're not saving the galaxy because of the Jedi way. But in spite of it, when you stood beside Rey in that final battle, it wasn't about being a Jedi or a Sith anymore. It was about finally choosing yourself. Not Snoke, not Luke, not your parents, just you, Ben. And for once, you weren't trying to control the Force. You were flowing with it. But even then, the weight didn't lift. Because redemption doesn't erase scars. When you brought Rey back, when you gave up your life for hers, it wasn't a grand Jedi act. It was a human one. It wasn't about prophecy or balance or destiny. It was just you doing the one thing no one ever let you do, love without fear. And that's the final tragedy of being a Jedi. From childhood, they trained that part out of you, told you love was dangerous. That attachment would lead to suffering. They turned something beautiful into something forbidden. And in doing that, they ensured that people like you would break. Because love didn't make you weak. Denying it did. So there you were, Ben Solo again, no mask, no lightsaber, no rank or title, just a young man who loved someone enough to give everything, and finally found peace not through the Jedi code, but by stepping outside of it. You didn't get a legacy, you didn't get a parade. Your name won't be in holobooks, but you mattered. And that last choice, that moment of clarity, of connection, of truth, that was yours. And that's why it sucked to be a Jedi. Because they taught you how to fight, how to serve, how to sacrifice, but they never taught you how to live with yourself when the war ended. Never taught you how to heal. Never taught you how to choose love. Even when everything told you not to, you had to learn that on your own, and you paid the price for it with everything. From the very start, you never really fit the mold. You did the training, passed the trials, followed the rituals. But somewhere deep down, even as a youngling, something always felt off. Like you were swimming upstream in an order that had become more about structure than truth. You wanted to feel the Force, not study it like some textbook. You wanted to listen, not just recite doctrine. And that quiet resistance, that spark of independence, never sat well with the Jedi Council. You didn't rebel just to rebel. You weren't out there flipping tables and storming out of temples. No, your defiance came quietly. You questioned things, not to cause chaos, but to get closer to the Force itself. While other Jedi obsessed over rules, you obsessed over meaning. They quoted codes, you meditated under trees. They strategized, you listened, and that's what made you dangerous. See, being a Jedi wasn't just about swinging a lightsaber. It was about politics, status, obedience. You were expected to climb ranks, command clone battalions, sit on councils, but you never cared about any of that. You didn't want to be a general or a politician. You just wanted to do what the Force whispered in your gut. That made you unpredictable. And the Council hates unpredictable. They called you willful, reckless, even stubborn. And sure, maybe you were. But the truth is, you just didn't buy what they were selling. The Jedi had become detached, cold, obsessed with prophecy and bureaucracy. They were so focused on maintaining order, they stopped feeling the Force entirely. You felt it slipping through their fingers. And while the other Jedi sat in their tall chairs, debating semantics, you were out there, in the streets, in the dirt, helping real people with real problems. And you weren't alone. You had someone by your side, a bright, passionate Padawan, who looked up to you like a father, Obi-Wan. He was sharp, disciplined, everything the Council liked, and yet, he stayed. He followed you, not because you were perfect, but because he knew you saw something more than rules. He questioned you, yes, but he also trusted you, even when he didn't fully understand. Still, even Obi-Wan couldn't fully grasp what the Council was missing. You tried to explain it, how the Jedi were losing touch with the living Force, how they were becoming tools of the Republic instead of guardians of balance. But no one wanted to hear it. You brought your concerns to Yoda, Mace, the entire Council. They nodded, but dismissed you like a crazy old wizard rambling about mysticism. Then came the visions. The Force showed you a boy, a child born in the Outer Rim with no father, a disturbance in the Force so intense you couldn't ignore it. Anakin Skywalker, the supposed chosen one. You felt it in your bones. He was important. Dangerous, yes, but important. The Council saw a problem. You saw destiny. And when they refused to train him, you didn't back down. You told them they were blind, that they'd lost the ability to truly see. And maybe that was the moment you sealed your fate. You made enemies by speaking truth. You questioned the machine, and the machine didn't like that, so they turned their backs. Oh, they didn't expel you. They weren't that bold. They just left you on the outside, quietly. They labelled you as fringe, assigned you to the dusty missions, denied your requests, ignored your warnings. You became a ghost in your own temple. Still a Jedi, still loyal, but never truly accepted. And the whole time that weight grew heavier, because deep down, you knew. You weren't just at odds with the Council. You were at odds with the entire system. The Jedi were drifting, and you couldn't pull them back. And that's why it sucked to be a Jedi. Because sometimes the worst thing isn't being cast out. It's being right and still ignored. You didn't fall, you didn't turn, you stayed true. And somehow, that made you the outsider. You were the Jedi the Order needed, and the one they refused to become. It started simple. A routine negotiation with the Trade Federation. You'd done this sort of thing a dozen times before. Get sent in as a Jedi ambassador, flash your lightsaber if needed, keep things civil, leave before anyone got too bold. But this time, it was different. There was something darker in the air, something more than just politics. You felt it the second you stepped off the ship. Naboo wasn't just caught in a bureaucratic mess, it was under siege. The Trade Federation had blockaded the planet, and the Senate, in its typical fashion, was bogged down in red tape. The Queen was pleading for help, innocent people were suffering, and once again, the Jedi Council was playing it safe, too wrapped up in procedure to act. But you moved, because that's who you were. You and Obi-Wan smuggled yourselves down to the surface, navigated droid patrols, and found your way to Queen Amidala. You didn't ask permission. You didn't wait for orders. You saw people in danger and decided to help. That's what the Jedi were supposed to do, right? But even then, the Force kept pulling your attention elsewhere. You found a boy, Anakin, on a backwater planet called Tatooine, born a slave living in dust and heat, building things out of scraps. He didn't look like much, just a quiet kid with quick hands and a faster mind. But the moment you spoke to him, you felt it. Like the Force itself paused for breath. Like the galaxy tilted. You believed he was the chosen one. Not because of arrogance, not because of prophecy, because you felt it. His presence in the Force was like nothing you'd ever sensed before. Pure potential. Wild, chaotic, raw, but powerful. And underneath it all, that same feeling you had when you were a boy, that he didn't belong to any of this. He was trapped in a system that didn't deserve him. So you made a choice. You gambled everything. Your reputation, your standing with the Council, your future. To bring him with you. You freed him from slavery, brought him to Coruscant, stood before the Council, and told them plainly, this boy is the key, train him. And they said no, too old, too emotional, too dangerous. They didn't see what you saw, didn't feel what you felt. So you said something no Jedi had dared say in a long time. You would train him yourself, even though you already had a Padawan, even though it broke the rules, even though it meant going against everything the Order expected. But before you could begin, your mission called again. You returned to Naboo, helped liberate the Queen's palace, led the charge against the droid army, fought alongside your apprentice. And that's when it happened. In the shadows of a third hangar, you came face to face with something ancient, something terrifying. A figure cloaked in black, horns curling from his skull, wielding a double-bladed lightsaber. A Sith. They were supposed to be extinct, gone for 1,000 years. Another thing the Council was wrong about. But there he was, Darth Maul, red and black, furious and focused. And in that moment, you knew you wouldn't walk away. The duel was brutal. You held your own. You were faster, wiser, more experienced. But you were also alone. And Maul was fueled by rage, spinning like a storm. He split you from Obi-Wan, knocked you into the energy pit, and before you could recover, he struck. A burning blade through the gut. You collapsed. You'd fought so hard to follow the will of the Force. You'd tried so desperately to warn the Jedi of what was coming. And now, you were dying. Not in glory, not in triumph, just lying on cold metal, your breath fading. But even then, you didn't think of yourself. You reached for Obi-Wan, whispered your last wish, begged him to train Anakin, because the Order wouldn't, because they didn't believe. But maybe, just maybe, Obi-Wan would, and then, nothing. The Council mourned you, spoke kind words, but they didn't change. They trained Anakin, yes, but not the way you would have. They tried to force him into their mold, tried to crush his feelings, his attachments, his fear. Everything you would have guided, they ignored or punished. You died believing in the boy, but the Jedi failed him. And that's why it sucked to be a Jedi, because even in death you were right, and still unheard. You gave your life for the future, but the ones who survived still clung to the past. You were the bridge between the old and the new, the Jedi who saw the storm coming, but never got to prepare anyone for the flood. And in the end, all you left behind was a ghost, an unspoken warning echoing through the Force, one that nobody truly heard until it was already too late. You were never supposed to be a Jedi. Not really. You were just a moisture farmer on a hot rock called Tatooine, waking up every morning to fix vaporators and stare out at the twin suns like they might answer the questions you didn't even know how to ask. You dreamed of adventure, of escaping the dirt and rust and loneliness of that backwater life. But you didn't know what that dream would cost you. Your aunt and uncle kept you close, always dodging the truth about who you were and where you came from. You thought they were just overprotective. Turns out they were hiding you from your father, not because he abandoned you, because he'd become the most feared man in the galaxy. But nobody told you that. When Obi-Wan Kenobi finally showed up, an old man with too many secrets, it all sounded like the start of some noble journey. He gave you your father's lightsaber and told you that your dad was once a great Jedi Knight. He didn't mention the screaming children in the Jedi Temple. He didn't mention Mustafa. He didn't mention the mask. You were thrown into war before you knew how to hold a lightsaber properly. First time you saw a Death Star, it was because you were already flying toward it. You watched your mentor, your last link to any real answers, get struck down in front of you. You didn't even have time to mourn. The rebellion needed hope, and you were their symbol now. The kid who blew up the Empire's ultimate weapon. They cheered for you, but nobody stopped to ask if you were okay. You started training with Yoda on Dagobah, a swamp world that smelled like mildew and regret. He talked in riddles, tested your patience, pushed your limits. He taught you that being a Jedi meant giving up everything. Attachments, anger, fear, the people you loved. But he never told you what to do when your friends were suffering. When you saw them in pain, you didn't hesitate. You left your training half finished. You walked into Vader's trap because you thought doing the right thing was more important than the Jedi rules. And that's when everything shattered. He didn't kill you. He didn't torture you. He looked you in the eyes and told you the one thing no Jedi was prepared to handle. I am your father. There's no Jedi training for that. There's no holocron explaining how to react when the man you've been told is pure evil turns out to be your blood. Suddenly every truth you'd ever been told felt like a lie. Obi-Wan lied. Yoda lied. They told you your father was gone, and it was easier for them to say that than admit they failed to save him. And now they wanted you to do what they couldn't. Kill him. You weren't ready for the lightsaber. You weren't ready for the Force. You were barely ready to leave your home planet, and now the galaxy was putting its entire future in your hands. No room for mistakes, no room for doubt. You were supposed to become a symbol of balance, hope, purity. But inside, you were drowning in questions. Every Jedi book, every mentor, every ghost just said the same thing. Let go of everything, even the people who needed you most. And still, you kept going. You believed there was good in your father, even when everyone else told you it was gone. You weren't trying to win a war, you were trying to save someone. But the Jedi didn't teach redemption. They taught detachment, they taught obedience, and they never expected someone like you to break the rules. You saved your father in the end, but at what cost? You watched him die. You burned his armor with your own hands. You stood there, alone, as the galaxy celebrated and fireworks lit up the sky. They called you a hero, a Jedi, but they didn't see the weight you carried, the pressure pressing down from every direction. You weren't just a Jedi now, you were the last one, the last light of a broken legacy. A legacy that chewed people up and called it enlightenment. And you were expected to rebuild it. You thought the adventure would be the hard part. You thought the danger would be what made being a Jedi painful. But the real pain, it was the silence after. The loneliness, the pressure, the idea that if you failed, everything failed with you. And worst of all, you didn't even get a chance to say no. You were a Jedi now, or at least you were supposed to be. Everyone looked at you like you had all the answers. The boy from Tatooine, the man who redeemed Darth Vader, the one who brought balance to the Force. But nobody really knew what that meant, not even you. There were no instructions, no counsel, no ancient texts that made any real sense. Just ashes. You were standing in the ruins of a religion that couldn't save itself, and now you were expected to rebuild it from scratch. You started training a new generation, hand-picking students across the galaxy, trying to do things differently. Less dogma, more balance, or so you told yourself. But deep down, you were afraid to repeat the past, terrified of becoming the same kind of teacher Obi-Wan had been to your father. You wanted to build a better order, stronger, wiser, kinder. But how could you lead anyone when the weight of your own name was already bending your spine? And then came Ben Solo. He was powerful. more than any student you'd trained. But he was also angry, conflicted, shadowed by a name that came with as much pressure as your own. Leia's son, Vader's grandson. The galaxy whispered about bloodlines, destinies, curses. You tried to teach him discipline, compassion, control. But it was never enough, because the fear inside you wasn't about him. It was about yourself. You saw darkness in him, and in a moment of pure Jedi reflex, that old, cruel Jedi conditioning, you ignited your lightsaber. Just for a second. Just long enough to ruin everything. You didn't strike, but he saw the blade. He saw your fear, and in that moment, you became everything you swore you'd never be. The master who couldn't be trusted. Ben destroyed the temple. He killed or scattered your students. He vanished into the dark and became something else entirely. Not just a failure, a reminder that no matter what you tried to build, the Jedi legacy was cursed to repeat itself. And so, you ran. You left everything behind. The saber, the robes, the Force itself. You boarded a ship and disappeared to the edge of the galaxy, like a wounded animal looking for a quiet place to die. You didn't want to teach. You didn't want to be found. You wanted to erase yourself from the story, as if disappearing could undo the choices that led you here. The galaxy called you a legend. They wrote songs about you, told stories around campfires. But the real Luke Skywalker? He was living on a lonely island, drinking green milk from alien sea beasts, haunted by ghosts he couldn't silence. Yoda showed up now and then, laughing through the pain, telling you failure was the greatest teacher. Easy for him to say. He never had to look a terrified teenager in the eye and realize he was the one holding the blade. You tossed your lightsaber like it meant nothing. You told Rey the Jedi were a mistake. That arrogance, detachment, and hubris were the heart of the problem. And you weren't wrong. The Jedi took bright, curious kids and taught them to suppress their feelings, to see attachment as a weakness, to ignore fear and love and grief like they were viruses instead of proof you were alive. You'd lived that life and it broke you. And now they wanted you to start it all over again. But even in exile, the galaxy didn't leave you alone. The Force didn't let you rest. The burden of your name was always there, stitched into every breath, reminding you that running away wasn't the same as healing. You thought disappearing would bring peace, but the silence only made the guilt louder. And then Rey came knocking, with the same fire you once had, full of questions you couldn't answer. You didn't want to train her. You didn't want to break another student. But the Force had already chosen her, just like it once chose you. The cycle was starting again, and you were trapped inside it. No matter how far you ran, being a Jedi wasn't something you could take off. It clung to you like a scar. It defined you, even when you didn't want it to. And the worst part, no matter how much wisdom or strength you found, you were still just a man trying to live up to a myth the galaxy had invented without asking you first. You were never allowed to be Luke, only Skywalker, and that name came with a lightsaber, a legend, and a lifetime of pain you never asked for. By the time you face your final days, you're carrying the weight of an entire galaxy on your shoulders. The Jedi Order you dreamed of rebuilding is nothing more than a memory, a flickering light in the darkness that you tried so hard to protect. The mistakes you made, the lives lost, the betrayals, they haunt you like shadows that stretch longer with every sunset. You're the last Jedi now, not by choice but by fate. The entire Order is gone except for you. People look to you like you're a god, or a relic, or both. But inside you're just a man who never wanted this. You never wanted to be a legend. You wanted a simple life on a farm, with friends and laughter and peace. Instead you got war, betrayal, and a destiny that felt more like a curse. You remember your time on Ahsoka, that lonely island surrounded by endless ocean and ancient ruins, where the Force felt silent, like the universe was holding its breath. You hid away, hoping the past wouldn't catch you, hoping maybe the Force itself would forget you. But the past always finds you, especially when the galaxy's future depends on it. Enter Rey, that fierce girl with the heart of a lion, and the stubborn hope that Jedi could be something better. You tried to teach her, but not in the way the Jedi had taught you. You wanted to break the cycle of pride, control, and blind faith. You told her the Jedi had failed, that the Order was a mistake wrapped in good intentions. You tried to push her away, to let her find her own path without the burden of your mistakes weighing her down. But she wouldn't leave. She forced you to face yourself, your failures, your fears, your hopes. And maybe that's the real pain of being the last Jedi. You can't escape what you've become. You're a symbol of everything broken and beautiful about the Jedi. You're a living paradox, both savior and sinner. Then came the moment of truth. The moment when you stood alone against the galaxy's darkness to buy time for the future. You projected yourself across the stars with the Force, an impossible act of strength and sacrifice that left your body weak and empty. You became a legend, a myth whispered among rebels and dreamers. And when you finally faded, the galaxy mourned the loss of the last true Jedi. But the story didn't end with you. Rey carried the flame forward, flawed, hopeful, and ready to rewrite the story. The Jedi wouldn't die with you, but they would have to change. They would have to learn from everything you'd lost. And you? You became a ghost in the Force, a reminder that even heroes are human, and even legends can fail. Being Luke Skywalker meant living with impossible expectations, constant loss, and a legacy that no one asked for, but everyone depended on. It meant carrying the weight of hope and failure at the same time, never fully free, never fully at peace. So yeah, it sucked to be a Jedi, especially when you were the last one standing, trying to hold a broken dream together, while the galaxy spun out of control. But maybe, just maybe, it was worth it for the chance to believe that the light could come back, even after the darkest night. You were just a kid, not a warrior, not a master, not some robed sage perched on a council chair, just a boy with bright eyes and too much hope, standing in the temple halls of Coruscant with a lightsaber you were barely strong enough to hold. And then it all burned. Order 66 wasn't some distant rumour. It wasn't a historical footnote. It was real, it was sudden, and it tore your galaxy in half. One moment the clones were your friends, your brothers in arms. The next they turned their rifles on you with blank faces and no hesitation. You didn't understand. None of you did. Your master, Yarrow Tapel, he fought like a beast, deflecting blasts, roaring orders, dragging you through fire and death just to keep you breathing. But even he couldn't outrun the betrayal. He died saving you, and his last words were more weight than comfort. Survive. And so you did. You hid your lightsaber. You buried the Force deep inside yourself, like a dangerous secret that would get you killed if anyone caught a glimpse of it. No more meditations, no more sparring, no more being a Jedi. Just survival. You became a scrapper. Woke up before sunrise on Bracca every day, climbed rusted hulls, hauled starship guts, and tried not to fall or speak too loudly. The Force pulsed inside you like a heartbeat you weren't allowed to feel. You flinched every time someone got too close, because if they found out, if they saw the way things floated around you, or noticed your reflexes were just a little too quick, they'd report you. And then the Empire would come, and eventually, they did. You didn't want to be a hero, you didn't want to fight. But when that stormtrooper almost killed your friend, you reached out. You caught him with the Force, reflexively, instinctively, and just like that, everything unraveled. The Inquisitors came, Trilla, Second Sister, and you were no longer invisible. You were a Jedi again, whether you liked it or not. But the galaxy you stepped back into wasn't the one you left. It wasn't full of Jedi wisdom and noble causes. It was broken, dead. A graveyard with a throne in the middle, and Palpatine sitting at the top of it, watching. You joined forces with a few lost souls, Sierra, Grease, BD1, and as much as they helped, you never stopped feeling alone. Because there's a kind of loneliness that only a Jedi fugitive understands. You're hunted not just for what you've done, but for what you are. You weren't trying to be a savior. You were just trying to reconnect the pieces, to understand what the Jedi meant, to carry something forward that hadn't been completely destroyed. But everywhere you looked, archives were burned, temples ransacked, your people turned to ash or madness. And the Force, it wasn't always a comfort. Sometimes it was just a reminder of everything you'd lost. You weren't ready. You didn't ask for this. And still, every planet you set foot on, you fought, with that half-broken saber in your hand and memories gnawing at your heart. You kept going. Not because you wanted to save the galaxy, but because you didn't want to be the last flicker of a flame that had already gone out. So, yeah, being a Jedi, it wasn't noble, it wasn't clean, it wasn't peaceful. It was grief, it was guilt, it was pressure, and it was surviving in a world that kept trying to erase you. You tried to stay in the shadows. You really did. After Bracca, after the Inquisitors nearly gutted your second life, You promised yourself you'd be cautious, that you'd only use the Force when there was no other option. But you forgot something. Jedi don't get to make promises like that, not anymore. From the moment you escaped with Siri and Grease, it wasn't just about survival anymore. It became about legacy, about restoring what was lost. Siri believed there was still hope, that somewhere out there, hidden in the stars, was a path forward, a way to rebuild the Jedi Order from the ruins. You didn't know if she was right, but when you found that ancient vault on Bogano, when you touched that holocron, felt the lingering presence of Master Eno Cordova, and saw the faces of Force-sensitive children flickering through the air, you understood something terrifying. You weren't just hiding anymore. You were carrying the future. And it sucked. Because now, you weren't just a survivor. You were a symbol. You were the last Jedi that people might actually find, trust, and follow. You had to be calm, wise, brave, all the things you didn't feel inside. The galaxy didn't care how broken you were. It didn't care about your nightmares. It didn't care that some nights you woke up gasping for air, remembering the moment Jaro Tapal fell, and you couldn't do a thing to stop it. It needed a Jedi, so you played the part. You travelled across ancient tombs and shattered worlds. You bled for knowledge, you deciphered cryptic alien puzzles, fought beasts older than the Clone Wars, and faced off against machines still programmed to kill Jedi on sight. Every step forward chipped away at you. Not just physically, but spiritually. Because the truth was, the closer you got to rebuilding the Order, the more you realized how impossible it really was. The Jedi weren't just gone, they had been erased. Their teachings, their records, even their statues, ground into dust. And even worse, some of it deserved to be forgotten. That's what started eating at you. You found echoes of who the Jedi used to be, dogmatic, detached, blindly loyal to the Republic, even as it fell into the Chancellor's trap. You heard whispers of Jedi who lost themselves, who turned a blind eye to suffering because emotion was forbidden. You felt how their rigidity let Darth Sidious take control right under their noses, and now you were supposed to bring that back. The holocron showed you names, Force-sensitive children scattered across the galaxy, little kids who hadn't yet realized how dangerous they were just for existing. If you found them, trained them, protected them, would that be salvation? Or would you just be feeding them into the same cycle that crushed you? The doubt crept in. Were you really helping them, or dragging them into something doomed? Meanwhile, the galaxy never stopped pushing back. The Empire tightened its grip. The Inquisitors stalked you with cold precision, especially Trilla, second sister. She wasn't just an enemy. She was a warning, a Jedi youngling who had once stood exactly where you had, innocent, hopeful, loyal, only to be tortured, broken, and rebuilt into a weapon for the dark side. Every time you crossed sabers with her, you saw what could happen to you. You saw what might happen to the children if you failed them. The worst part, you understood her pain, you felt it, and it made the fight harder. By the time you reached the Fortress Inquisitorius, when you stood on that flooded obsidian hellscape and faced the horrors within, you weren't just battling stormtroopers or Dark Force users. You were wrestling with your own fear, your own guilt, and still you fought. Because what else was there to do? When you finally got your hands on the holocron, when it was yours, and those names of future Jedi glowed softly before you, you held the fate of the Force in your hands. And you destroyed it. You knew you couldn't go through with it. Not like that. Not when you were still so unsure. Not when you couldn't guarantee their safety. So you shattered the holocron. You let the Force guide them instead. You let go. And that decision, while wise, left you more alone than ever. Because now, there were no more plans, no more grand missions. Just you, floating through a galaxy that had already buried your kind. You weren't a Jedi Master. You weren't some heroic knight reborn. You were just a kid who had seen too much, lost too many people, and still believed, just barely, that maybe there was something in the Jedi way worth saving. That maybe being a Jedi didn't mean wearing robes and quoting ancient texts. Maybe it just meant trying your best not to give in to the darkness, even when it would be easier. The lightsaber's still in your hand, but it doesn't feel like a weapon of peace anymore. It's a tool for survival, for vengeance, for lashing out at a galaxy that forgot what hope even means. Years have passed since Bogano, since the holocron, since you told the Force to take the wheel. You thought things might get better if you stopped chasing the Jedi fantasy, if you focused on living, but the galaxy didn't slow down. The Empire got crueler, stronger, smarter, they hunted harder, and now you've stopped hoping for peace. You're just hoping to make it through another week without losing someone else. You've become a shadow of the Jedi you were trying to become. No temple, no council, just you and a few scrappy rebels, fighters, thieves, loners, people like Bode, who walk the line between good and desperate. People like Merrin, who understand that there's no honor in dying quiet. And people like Grease, who still cook you a warm meal even when your soul feels frozen solid. But even they can't fix the part of you that's splintering. You've started doing things you never imagined. You've gotten used to taking lives, to stabbing first, to choosing the cold, effective option. It eats at you, but you keep doing it, because you tell yourself you have to. If you stop, if you pause even for a second, people will die. Maybe worse, maybe they'll fall into the same darkness you fight every day. You've taken on the weight of the Jedi Order without ever being sure it should come back at all. The worst part is you keep seeing ghosts, not real ones, though Force echoes still haunt the halls of old temples and the battlefield bones of Clone Wars past, but ghosts of yourself, who you were, who you might have been. Every time you help a civilian and they whisper Jedi with a look of reverence, you flinch, because they're not looking at you. They're seeing a myth, a symbol, and you know what the galaxy does to symbols. It crushes them. And just when you think you've got your new life figured out, balanced precariously between staying alive and not turning into the thing you hate, Bode betrays you. That one hurts deeper than anything. He was your brother in arms, a survivor like you, a father trying to protect his daughter. You understood him. That made it worse, because his betrayal wasn't just a knife in the back, it was a mirror. He wasn't evil, he wasn't Sith, he just broke under the pressure. Just like you might one day. And when you chased him across that crumbling mess of broken promises, when you fought him with fire in your chest and blood in your mouth, the question hit you like a blaster to the chest. How far from the Jedi Code have you already strayed? You've killed, lied, broken rules that once defined your whole identity. You've embraced fear, anger, love, attachment, all the things the Jedi said would doom you. But the thing is, the Code never saved anyone. It didn't save the Temple. It didn't save your master. It didn't save the galaxy. So why are you still holding on? You wonder that every time you close your eyes, every time you rebuild your saber, every time you bury another friend and whisper something to the Force, not knowing if it's listening. There's no temple anymore, no Master Yoda to guide you, just memories, just instinct, just scars. But even after all of it, even when your faith is hanging by a thread, you can't let go of what you used to believe. Because deep down, there's still a part of you that remembers why you started this journey in the first place. A part that still thinks being a Jedi should mean something. That maybe, one day, someone else will pick up a lightsaber, not as a weapon, but as a promise. Not to kill, but to protect. And maybe you'll never get to see that future. Maybe all you'll ever be is the tired, bleeding bridge between what was and what might be. But if that's what it takes, you'll keep fighting, even if it sucks. You grew up in the sand, not just around it, but inside it, beneath it, breathing it in until it was part of you. Jakku wasn't a planet, it was a graveyard pretending to be a home. You weren't raised by people, you were raised by the wreckage of better days. Half-buried star destroyers, bone-dry memories of wars you didn't fight. Your parents? Gone. All you had was the promise that they'd come back, and that promise rotted right alongside the husks of the Empire. And then one day, the galaxy noticed you. It should have felt magical, right? Destiny, adventure, a legacy waiting to be inherited. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like someone else's dream was being shoved into your ribs and told to grow. You didn't ask to find a droid carrying resistance secrets. You didn't ask to be dragged into a war or to pilot the Millennium Falcon like the universe suddenly decided you could. And you sure didn't ask to touch a lightsaber and see your whole life unravel in Force visions that didn't explain anything, just left you shaking in a cold corridor with ghosts in your ears. You were a nobody. You liked being a nobody, because it meant you didn't owe anyone anything. You didn't carry anyone's name. You didn't have a bloodline. No one expected you to save the galaxy, until suddenly they did. Suddenly, you were the last hope. You were the Jedi. You were the student of a broken man on a broken island who barely spoke and definitely didn't believe in happy endings. Luke Skywalker wasn't a hero anymore. He was a warning, a ghost of failure wrapped in bitterness. You wanted guidance. What you got was disappointment. He looked at you and saw every mistake he ever made. You looked at him and saw a future you didn't want. And still, you stayed, because something inside you said you had to. But here's the thing no one tells you. Being a Jedi isn't just lightsabers and mind tricks. It's isolation. It's self-denial. It's pressure so heavy it bends your bones. You're not allowed to be angry. You're not allowed to love. You're not even allowed to grieve the way normal people do. The galaxy wants you to be a monk with a weapon, a savior who never cracks. But you weren't trained for this. You had no temple, no council, no Padawan years, just books, ancient whispers, and a war that wouldn't wait for you to be ready. And then, the name, Palpatine. That was the moment everything shattered. The blood in your veins wasn't just ordinary. It was poison, the worst name in the galaxy, pulsing inside you like a ticking bomb. Suddenly every failure felt inevitable. Every dark thought felt dangerous. Every angry moment, every flicker of fear. A sign that you were already lost. Even when people said your choices defined you, it never felt true. How could it? The Jedi were supposed to be pure, balanced, controlled. And here you were, holding the name of a monster and a lightsaber that once belonged to a Skywalker, pretending you belonged in the same sentence as them. You trained, you fought, you tried to smile for your friends, but every time you closed your eyes, the Force felt less like a guide and more like a storm. And you were stuck in the middle with no shelter. And then there was him, Kylo Ben, a boy who hated the Jedi as much as he hated himself. You saw yourself in him, and that scared you more than any Sith, because he was a mirror, a future you didn't want to admit was possible. When he offered his hand, part of you wanted to take it, not because you believed in his cause, but because you were tired of being alone. But you didn't. You made the harder choice. You chose to stand on your own, to fight for the light, even when it didn't feel like it wanted you. You stood between the galaxy and another Palpatine, even if that meant killing a part of yourself. And somehow, after all the dust settled, they called you a Skywalker. Like that fixed everything. Like a name was enough to erase the pain, the fear, the endless pressure to be something more than you ever asked to be. You stood on Tatooine, on sand again, and told the Force you belonged. But deep down, you weren't sure. Not really. You were still a scavenger. Still looking for scraps of belonging in a galaxy that never gave you a place to start. You saved the galaxy, but you lost yourself over and over along the way. You carried a burden built for someone else, and still, you stood tall. That's the Jedi way, right? Suffer in silence, smile when it hurts, and keep fighting, even when it absolutely sucked. So you did it. You saved the galaxy. You faced down an evil in its final, desperate form. You stood against your own blood and chose the light. Everyone says the story ends there. Roll credits, good triumphs, the Force is in balance, the girl from nowhere becomes a legend. But no one tells you what happens after. You wake up the next morning and there's no parade, no Jedi Council waiting to knight you, just silence. You walk out of the Falcon and the wind hits different. There's this moment where you think, shouldn't I feel complete? But instead, you feel empty. Not sad, not broken, just hollow, because the war was the only thing that gave your life shape. And now that it's over, you're just standing there, in borrowed boots with a borrowed name, wondering who the hell you actually are. Rey Skywalker. You said it out loud like it meant something. You chose it. You wanted to honor the people who showed you the way. Leia, Luke, but deep down, you know it isn't really yours. You didn't grow up in that name. You didn't inherit the pain that came with it. You weren't raised on Tatooine or Alderaan, or in the shadow of Anakin's legacy. You were a scavenger on a junkball planet, raised by no one, trained by scraps, and left to carry the Jedi Order on your back with nothing but a few old books and a yellow lightsaber you built by yourself. They say the Jedi are back now, that you're the start of a new generation. But what does that even mean? There's no temple, no structure, no other Jedi, just you and your ghosts. You've got the knowledge, sure, but knowledge doesn't hug you when the nightmares come back. It doesn't help when you're trying to teach young Force sensitives not to be afraid of their powers. While you're still afraid of yours, you try to keep your distance. That's what the Jedi did, right? No attachments, no love, no personal desires. But that's easy for a council to say when they've got 100 masters and 1,000 years of history. You've got a droid, a desert, and a graveyard of legacies buried beneath your name. And don't even get started on relationships. Jedi aren't supposed to love. But you felt it. That terrifying, magnetic, impossible thing that pulled you toward Ben Solo. You fought him, hated him, connected with him. And in the end, you watched him die to save you. The galaxy may call him a monster, but you saw the boy behind the mask. And just when he turned back, just when he stopped running from the light, it was too late. And now you have to carry that too. You carry his silence in every breath. Every time the Force whispers, you wonder if it's him. You feel guilt. Not because you let him go, but because you wonder if it could have been different. And like a true Jedi, you're not allowed to scream about it. You're not allowed to break down. You bury it deep, right alongside your own needs, your doubts, your right to just be human. People look at you like you're wise now, like you're some kind of galactic sage, ready to rebuild the order, but you're barely in your 20s. You still flinch when you ignite your saber. You still hear Palpatine's voice in your worst dreams. You still don't know if the Force chose you, or if you just happened to be in the right place at the worst time. And yet, the galaxy doesn't care. It wants a Jedi, so you become one. Not because it's glorious, but because someone has to. You read the old texts by lamplight, copying phrases you barely understand. You train in silence, correcting your own mistakes, with nobody there to guide you. You try to build a school, but it's just a hut with hopes inside. You find Force-sensitive kids, and they look at you like you have answers. You don't. You only have the pain of figuring things out the hard way. And the Force? It's not comforting. It's wild, unpredictable. One minute it lifts you, the next it crushes you with visions you didn't ask for. It's like holding lightning in your chest and pretending it doesn't burn. Being a Jedi was never about glory. You learned that quickly. It's about sacrifice, loneliness. It's about pretending you don't miss the simple things. A laugh with friends, a night where the galaxy doesn't expect you to save it, a moment where you could just exist. You carry the light, but no one sees how heavy it is. And still, you keep going. Because maybe someone, someday, will look at you and feel less alone. Maybe your story, messy, complicated, full of scars, will help someone find their way. That's what being a Jedi really means now. Not being perfect, but trying anyway. You're Rey Skywalker. Not because you were born to it, but because you chose to rise from the wreckage and be better even when it sucked.